Welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are at in the world. We are going to be talking about simplifying online and blended learning with Hāpara today. So my name is Lindy Hockenbary. I'm the professional learning manager at Hāpara. As you guys, I'm going to kind of stop throughout and do some polls and ask you some questions. You can add questions to the Q&A, and I have them up here, so I will stop periodically and address those. If there's a lot, I'll kind of hold off and address them at the end. I'll make sure to keep some time at the end for some Q&A. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump right in. I am going to send a poll out. Let me see, I've never done polls in GoToWebinar, so we're gonna see if this works. Okay, so you should have a poll that popped up on your screen. Does your school currently use Hāpara? Yes, no, or not sure. So I will pause a second. Okay. Looks like I got almost everybody. I'll give it a couple more seconds here. Got some answers still coming in. Okay, that looks like almost everybody answered. We're going to leave it at that. Let me go ahead and share the results. So it looks like we have most people on the webinar currently use Hāpara. We've got maybe a couple no's and a few not sure. So thank you for that. That kind of helps me know who I'm talking to today. So before we get into the main content, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of terminology and what exactly we're talking about when we're talking about online and blended learning. So face-to-face learning is when the learner and the teacher are in the same physical space. On the other end of that spectrum, we have online learning. So learning that occurs over the internet, the teacher and the learner are not in the same physical space, okay? So those are kind of both ends of this learning continuum. Then the whole middle part of that is what we call blended learning. Blended learning is any combination of face-to-face and online learning. So blended learning can look a million different ways, basically. It makes up a very large part of the learning continuum. And here's the thing about blended learning. Since it's a mix or a combination of face-to-face and online, it has an online component. So what's great about that is a lot of the strategies that you use for online learning, you can also use for the online component of blended learning. So we're going to kind of focus our discussion today on kind of the right side of this learning continuum, on blended learning and online learning. So I am curious, let me send out another poll here, what learning model your school is following right now? Are you in a full face-to-face model? So your teachers and students are in the same physical space. Are you fully online? Are you in some form of blended, or you might hear the term hybrid model where maybe you have like an A/B schedule or something else that I haven't heard of. I think most things should fall under those three umbrellas, but you never know nowadays. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds here. So far we've got most of the people on are in a fully online or fully virtual environment right now. We've got some that are in some form of blended or hybrid model. By the way, blended and hybrid really are defined as the same thing because hybrid is some form of face-to-face and online, right? So hybrid really becomes blended, blended really becomes hybrid. You kind of hear both terms out there, right? In 2020, hybrid, the term hybrid blew up for some reason, and we have lots of hybrid models going on. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop, close the poll, and let me share. So here we are. We've only have maybe like one person that's face-to-face. Over half of you are fully online, and close to the other half are in some form of blended or hybrid model. Very good. Okay, well, you have come to the right place, because that is what we're going to talk about today. So what I want to kind of focus our discussion on is around 4 specific like big ideas about online and blended learning. So you can think of these like the principles of online and blended learning. They're kind of like the essence of online learning in a way. Now, There are more principles in this, but due to time, I just kind of focused it on four that are really important. So I'll introduce them now and then I'll break them down and we'll kind of talk about each. So you must focus on the social emotional. You need to embed brain breaks. Choice is key to engagement, and consistency. So my goal for you today in this webinar is to kind of give you some little strategies that you can use to help implement those big ideas. Those 4 big ideas is kind of the goal. So most of you are Hāpara users. We have a few that don't use Hāpara at their school. So I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and knowing what Hāpara is and kind of how it fits in with Google. So if you think of Google's G Suite for Education as kind of like the soil, Hāpara is kind of like a seed that comes in and plants and kind of creates this root system throughout the soil. So in other words, Hāpara integrates with G Suite for Education in order to provide more instructional management. So we've got little Heapy there, plants the seed, kind of creates this root system. That root system, aka Hāpara, is very grounded in the idea of the 5 visible learning tenets. So formative assessment, differentiation, collaboration, transparent goals, and learner agency. So as you start to learn the Hāpara tools, those are the 5 things that you'll see kind of throughout all the different tools and throughout the whole instructional suite. So the idea is that, sorry, I mean to click happy there. The idea is that Hāpara is kind of like this root system that integrates with Google's G Suite for Education in order to provide more instructional focus and grow self-directed learners. So there you go. So there's Hāpara in a nutshell, if you're unfamiliar. So let's start with our first big idea. Our first big idea is you have to focus on the social emotional. Why is this? The research tells us that creating personal connections is critical to learning in any learning environment across the learning continuum, right? That shouldn't be much of a surprise to any of you. The research also tells us that that student-teacher relationship in particular is really critical to online learning success. So in order for students to be successful in online learning, they really need to build a relationship with their teacher. Online students are also more apt to remain active in an online course if they feel a sense of community, okay? So that's what the research tells us. What does that mean we need to do then as online teachers and blended teachers? We need to build relationships, we need to make connections, and we need to develop a sense of community in our online courses. So how do you do this? This is always the first question of every new online teacher. How do I build relationships with a student that I never see if I'm teaching full online, or if I'm teaching in some type of blended or hybrid model, I might only see that student a couple days a week. How do I build those relationships? So the research says that you have to find new ways. You have to be very intentional, right? Because relationship building happens really naturally when we're in a physical space with other human beings, right? It's very fluid, it's very natural. It's not natural in an online environment. So you have to be very strategic, you have to be very intentional. It also has to be continual. It can't be a one-off. So you can't do one little relationship building activity the first week of your online or blended course and then be done, right? It doesn't work that way. It's gotta be continual, it's gotta be consistent. So what I wanna do is I wanna break down the 2 major parts of the online component of online and blended learning, right? So the online component of blended, I should say, and then the online for the online learning, synchronous and asynchronous. And this is gonna help kind of frame these little strategies that you can do to help implement the big idea of social emotional learning. So synchronous means we're learning in real time together, right? Right now we're doing synchronous online learning. Asynchronous means we're learning at different times. So let's start by looking at synchronous. How do we build relationships in a synchronous online environment? There are 2 big things that really make this different than building relationships in a face-to-face environment. Lack of proximity and lack of nonverbal cues, right? So in synchronous online learning, you don't have proximity with your learners. And you can't really see those nonverbal cues. Even if you're on a video call and your students have their webcams on, it's still really hard to read nonverbal cues in an online environment. In a face-to-face environment, teachers rely on those things, right? So that's just kind of thinking about, like, these are the challenges with synchronous online. With that being said, one little strategy that you can do is you can use the message feature in Hāpara Highlights to send private messages to your students when you're on video calls. So Google Meet does not have the ability to send private messages, right? It's all or nothing. You either send a message to every student that's in the video call or no students. You can't send private messages. So that's where this message feature comes in really handy. So let's say that you are in a video call, you send your students off into their breakout rooms, right? And while they're working in their breakout rooms, you can kind of pop in and out, see what they're up to, but you can also open messages and you could send some little kind of social emotional focused messages to your students. So in this example, I see that Ellen's doing a really good job kind of leading her breakout room. So I send her a private message just kind of telling her that, hey, you're doing a good job. This message pops up in the top right corner of Ellen's device. She sees this and gets a little bit kind of like a, a pep talk, right? So that's kind of one way you can help start building those relationships. Another thing that's important is when you start group video calls is to start each session with some type of social emotional focus. So typically what I recommend is you start the session with kind of reviewing norms and expectations really quickly. So our norms are that you stay on topic in the chat, webcams are optional, and maybe one other thing. So we kind of review those so everybody's clear. Here's our expectations for our group video call time. Then I'm gonna spend like 15 minutes at least on kind of just checking in on my learners, right? Just seeing how they're doing, building relationships, making that sense of community. So one way you can do this is, again, using that message feature in highlights. So if you are a teacher, you're probably aware of the game Among Us. It's very popular right now amongst kids. My nieces, they're very into it and they taught me how to play. It's actually quite fun. So the concept of Among Us is that you are these little like minion looking characters and you're in a spaceship and one of you is an imposter, but you don't know who it is. And that imposter is trying to sabotage your space mission. So your whole goal is you're trying to figure out who the imposter is. So what you can do during kind of your virtual group time is play kind of a play on Among Us called Who is the Imposter? So this is kind of a combination of Among Us and like Two Truths and Two Lies, or no, what's it called? Two Truths and a Lie game. So what you would do is you would pick a student, just a random student, send them a message telling them that they're the imposter, okay? Because that's how the Among Us game starts, is it tells you on your screen when the game starts if you're an imposter or a crewmate. So you would pick a student, you would send them a message, you would tell them they're the imposter. So in this case, Ellen's the imposter, all right? Then you pick a question, some sort of like social emotional focused question to get to know your students, kind of relationship building focused. In this case, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? So you could say that verbally. You could also send that to the whole class via message feature as well. So it'll pop up in their top right of their screen. So that's kind of a nice little accessibility tip. So they're getting it verbally, they're also seeing it visually, right? So what's your favorite ice cream flavor? So all the students answer this question, but then they have to figure out who's the imposter, who didn't answer the question correctly. So this is a really fun way to engage your learners, get them to come to video calls, right? Your synchronous online time, get to know them, develop those relationships, make connections, develop a sense of community, and you're having a little bit of fun at the same time, right? So that's kind of a fun way that you can focus on the social emotional side during synchronous online time. Now let's talk about asynchronous. So asynchronous, we're learning at different times. Usually when a new online teacher hears, oh, I'm supposed to develop relationships asynchronously, how is that supposed to happen, right? Well, the research says you absolutely can do it. You can build relationships during asynchronous online learning. You just have to be very strategic and intentional about doing that, right? Because remember, it doesn't happen naturally. You have to be strategic. So here are some ideas. In Hāpara Workspace, you can embed some social emotional activities that are asynchronous. So in this example workspace, this is from one of our champions, Chris Miller. He built a workspace and embedded a dance challenge into it. So this can be a really fun way to kind of, get to know your students, build in something fun, increase engagement, entice them to interact with the online course, right? So that can be a really good way to integrate some relationship building time, is just add it into your workspace, right? As part of the learning that students are doing. Another thing you can do in Workspace is embed little pep talks as your students work through it. So in this case, I pulled one of my Bitmojis that just says you matter. You could think of all sorts of little sayings. It doesn't have to be a Bitmoji. You matter, you're smart, you're excellent, way to go. Any sort of little pep talky type messages that you can think of. And you can embed those into the cards in Workspace. So as your students are working asynchronously on their lessons in the workspace, they would see these little kind of pep talk messages throughout the workspace as they work along. Another idea is you can embed little pep talks within the assignments that you're having students do in Workspace. So in this example, we have a daily check-in form. So it's a Google form that students are supposed to complete every day. I embedded that in a Workspace card, right? But then when they open the form, the first thing they see is a little, I'm glad you're here, Bitmoji, right? Doesn't have to be a Bitmoji, it could just be a message, whatever works for you. It could be a short little 5-second video of you giving them a little pep talk message if you wanted even, okay? So that is another idea. So I want to ask you, and you guys can add this to the questions, to the Q&A, what little strategies do you have that you can use to focus on social emotional learning? So I gave you a few different ideas using the messaging and highlights to send personal messages. You can play who's the imposter. You can embed social emotional things into Workspace. So tell me, what little strategies can you do now to focus on the social emotional? I'll give it just a few seconds. See if anybody has any ideas. If you can find the question option. So yeah, don't look for chat, make sure to find the question option. Oh, there's one. Using video to send messages to students. Yeah, video is a really great way to make connections with students asynchronously. Actually, there's a lot of research about that, about video being a really solid strategy for building relationships in an online course, for sure. Okay, moving on. So our next kind of big idea for online and blended learning is embedding brain breaks. And why is this important? Video calls are just more fatiguing than face-to-face interactions. And the reason is based upon how our brains process information. Our brains process information differently over video and through a screen. Specifically, it requires more focus to comprehend information. So right now, all of you that are on the webinar, it's requiring more focus of your brain to comprehend what I'm telling you, okay? The other thing has to do with staring at a screen without visual breaks. Tends to make you more fatigued. So that's something with, synchronous online learning as well as asynchronous, that's important. So that's kind of the why behind brain breaks. The what is two things that I try to get my students to do is I try to get them to move just a little bit and just take their eyes away from the screen for even just a few seconds. Like it can be 30-second little brain break, even a minute, right? Just quick, easy. Get them to move, get their eyes away from the screen. So what can you do in synchronous online learning to embed brain breaks? Again, using that message feature. So let's say I have students in breakout rooms. I can send a message that goes to all students and I can give them something that they're supposed to do. I use one called DoorDash, or you can call it Run and Grab. I stole DoorDash from Ellen DeGeneres' show. That's what she calls it. So that's where I got DoorDash. You could call it run and grab. And basically the idea is you give students something to go run and grab, right? So in this example, they DoorDash to find an item that's smaller than 1,000 millimeters. So that would be if you wanted to link it to your content area. You can also make this super random. It could be go and find something that's red, right? Go and find something that that makes you happy, if you want to add even a social emotional focus here. So that can be a fun way to kind of send students a little message, have them go do a run and grab, find something, bring it back. If you're all in the video call together, they can show what they brought to other people. Another way you could do this is if they're in breakout rooms again, you can use the group feature to send specific run and grab items based upon, sorry, my dog is having a bad dream. I didn't know what was going on there. Based upon what they're learning in their group. So in this example, we're doing a World War II project. I have a Churchill group, an FDR group, and my Churchill group, I send them a specific message to go run and grab an item that you think depicts Winston Churchill's personality. So again, you can kind of take these brain breaks and you can kind of integrate them in with the content that you're learning as well. All right, another fun one I like to do is Google has this whole web page called Experiments with Google. So if you go to experiments.withgoogle.com, you'll find, I mean, there's literally hundreds of them. And some of these experiments, excuse me, are really good kind of movement focused things. So in this example, this one's called Move Mirror, and the students move their bodies through the webcam. And what it does is it takes and it lumps together images based upon their movements, and it makes a GIF. So it's something really fun that they can do, and they start kind of moving. So the share links feature and highlights is really, really great for this, because you don't have to worry about, you know, students typing in the wrong URL. I can just copy this URL right here, experiments.withgoogle.com/move-mirror. So I copy that. I put it in the share links option, and I can share it out to the whole class. So everybody's going to get a link to the site. Everybody can take 2 minutes to do a little move mirror where they make a little GIF of their movements, right? So they're getting up, they're moving, they're kind of taking their focus away from the screen for just a second. Some other Google experiments that are good that kind of get students moving, there's one called Body Synth, and they actually make music based upon their body's movements. So they move around and it makes moves. It's kind of like the idea of like a one-man band. Semiconductor is similar. They conduct an orchestra. They conduct an orchestra based upon their body movement. So that's another one that just kind of gets them moving. So same idea, you can copy the link to either one of these experiments, put them in the share links feature and highlights, and then you can send those out to your student devices, and those URLs or websites open automatically on your student devices. I'm sure most people are familiar with GoNoodle. So GoNoodle is a website that basically has movement videos. So you can also use the share links feature to send a video out to your students. You could do this asynchronously. So maybe you know your students are working on something particular. You could send this to them with a little message that says, hey, do this little GoNoodle video. You can do this synchronously. This is a nice way. Everybody's probably experienced trying to play a video over a synchronous virtual call. It can be really tricky trying to stream video over a video call. So instead of doing that, you just send the video to each student's devices, they mute, and they kind of do the video on their own. Super Movers is another example that has a lot of movement type videos. Depending upon where you're located at in the world, Super Movers is a BBC created thing. And so sometimes you can't get the videos on the site, the BBC site, but if you go to YouTube, you can search Super Movers and you can find videos that way. All right. So those were some ideas for synchronous. Now let's talk about asynchronous. So again, remember that the big thing with asynchronous is you want to get students kind of eyes off the screen for just a few seconds. Staring at a screen without visual breaks is what makes us fatigued, right? Actually, I had an eye doctor once that told me the 20-20 rule is that every 20 minutes, you look away from your device for 20 seconds. So you can kind of keep that in mind as you kind of think about when to embed brain breaks within both your synchronous and your asynchronous time. So some ideas for asynchronous brain breaks. I use GIFs a lot for brain breaks, both synchronous and asynchronous, by the way. But in this example, we'll look at an asynchronous one. So a GIF is basically a whole bunch of images that are taken and strung together, okay? And it creates a loop, an image loop, basically. It looks like a video, but it's really not a video. So this is a little example GIF of Winnie the Pooh touching his toes. So what you can do with GIFs is that since they're an image and not a video, you can actually embed GIFs in places where you can, pretty much any place where you can embed an image. Not all, but most. So in Hāpara Workspace, you can add an image to the top of the workspace card. So what this means is you can actually put a GIF as the image on the top of a workspace card. So in this example, I went and found this GIF of Winnie the Pooh touching his toes. I put it in the workspace card, which is this picture up here at the top, with a little instruction that says copy the Winnie the Pooh and 10 times, right? So they're supposed to touch their toes 10 times. And that's the brain break that's built within the workspace while they're working asynchronously. So GIFs are a really great tool for brain breaks. What I do is I go to Giphy, so GIPHY.com. This is a teacher-only website. Don't send your students here. You will find things that are not appropriate if you're not on a school web filter. So teacher-only site. I go there and I search for things like stretch, stretching, movement. You can even search for like cats, and you'll find tons of funny little GIFs of cats like stretching and moving around, or you can search for dogs. If you're looking for something that's more of a mindfulness break, you could search for breathe or breathing. And then you find all these nice little breathing GIFs that your students can follow along to. So then once you would find the GIF that you want, you would save it as an image, because remember, GIF is just kind of like an image file, and then you would add that to your workspace card. So pretty simple. All right, so let me pause. I see at least one question in here, and give you guys time to think about what little strategies could you do to embed brain breaks within your synchronous and your asynchronous online and blended learning. Looks like I have. Oh, okay, great. So we have Tristan said in terms of social emotional learning, he creates a class slideshow that everyone can edit, and then they're each assigned one slide as a get to know you activity. I actually do almost the exact same thing as a get to know you activity. So love it. So that's another way that you can do a little social emotional focus. That can be synchronous or asynchronous, right? You could have them do their slide during synchronous time, or they could do their slide during asynchronous time, and then you could talk about it during synchronous time. So many different options. Let's see. I let students choose a virtual background in Google Meet. Yeah, that's fun now that you have those virtual backgrounds in Google Meet. So giving them a chance to kind of choose one, you can make that a social emotional focus as well. So you can kind of get to know them. You know, Sally, why did you choose the background that you did? Oh, you really like X, right? So kind of you get a chance to get to know them. Very good. Okay. We will move on. So our third kind of big idea for online and blended learning is that choice is really key to engagement, okay? And the reason is when the teacher's not physically present, right? So during online learning and during the online component of blended or hybrid, learners have to take ownership over their learning, right? And the big thing here is that there's two main components that shift control to the student in online learning: time and space, right? In face-to-face learning, the teacher has control over time and space. In online learning, the student now has control over time and space. So by shifting that control, you have to shift control over other elements of the learning to the students, okay? So how do you do this? This isn't something that happens overnight, by the way. Your students aren't going to become completely self-directed learners overnight. You kind of have to scaffold and do things slowly. One really easy strategy is to use choice boards, or you could call them learning menus, basically the same idea. These are really, really easy to make. Most people will create a choice board and say like a Google Doc or a Google slide. Typically the choice board is made focused around choice with either the learning task or the learning resources, but usually you're not able to do both. The great thing about Workspace is that since you have those set columns, you can actually build choice boards into a workspace really easily, and you can embed choice at different parts of the choice board and not have to choose choice for just the learning task or just the learning resources. Okay, so in this example, we have column 2 are the green cards. Those are different choices that the student has in terms of the resources that they're going to learn to use to learn. So they get to choose, they can watch a video, they can read an information sheet, they can look over the slides, and then there's one other option at the bottom there. So notice there's different mediums in the choice, right? They can read, they can watch, they can listen, different options that they get within there. That doesn't mean they only have to do one. They can do more than one if they want, but they get to choose. Then in the third column, those are the blue cards. That's where you can embed some choice with the learning task or what's typically the assessment, right? So in this example, the first card is what's required. So they're required to answer specific questions, all right? But how they answer those questions, they get lots of choice in how to do that. So they can do a foldable, there's a choice for, they can create a PSA, a public service announcement. This one's about taxes, by the way. So they can create a PSA to educate others about taxes. They can make a political candidate's campaign video. So they're explaining their view on taxes to other people. And then there's several other options. So again, they have kind of a required piece. They have to answer these specific questions, but there's different choices in how they answer the questions. So this is really, really easy to do. You're just adding different workspace cards, basically, and creating a choice board or learning menu within Workspace. All right, so with that in mind, what little strategies can you do to focus on choice? Or maybe strategies that you already do where you've kind of focused on choice in your online and blended environments. I'll give you a second to add your thoughts in the questions. I know you guys have lots of ideas. Do the awkward teacher pause. I always tell teachers in online learning, you have to embrace the awkward teacher pause. Like that's something you have to figure out when you're teaching in face-to-face, right? I remember struggling with that when I first started teaching. The pause is even more awkward in a synchronous online environment, and you just have to get used to it. You have to understand that that's processing time. Part of it is the delay with the technology, right? Let's see, giving activities that doesn't have one right answer. Yeah, so that kind of gets down to the idea of thinking more broadly about assessment, right? You want to think of assessment that makes your students create things that aren't Googleable, right? Because in online learning, you can't determine, it's really hard, at least for you to give assessments that are memory based, right? Or route memorization. So you really have to think more broadly, and you have to think about how do I assess learning in a way that doesn't kind of, that students can't just go and Google the answer, right? They have to think of original thoughts. That's the trick there. So it doesn't have one right answer, they have to give original thoughts. I like to give activities and assignments that are very open-ended in the way that things are presented, so they can make a document, a presentation, an audio recording, or a video. Yep, exactly. So same idea of like choice boards, learning menus. So you're giving them lots of different options in the product, right? And how they produce what they're learning. I teach them to use Screencastify and WeVideo. Yeah, so as a way for them to show their learning. Screencast videos are a really great tool for both you and students in online environments because for the teacher-student relationship, it allows students to see and hear you as the teacher, right? And it also allows you to at least hear your students. If they don't have their webcams on, you can at least hear them. The other benefit of that is it allows you to hear their thinking, right? You can kind of hear the thought process. So a really good assessment in math is to tell them to explain how they solved a math problem using a screencast video. And you really can start to figure out what they understood, what they didn't understood, what they took from the activity, etc. Okay, let's go on to our last big idea here. My computer will respond. Consistency, consistency, consistency. So this is a biggie. This is like a really big idea when it comes to online and blended learning. The research supports, and by research I mean a significant amount of research supports that organization, consistency, and clarity are really, really, really critical to online learning. It's really clear in the research that increased clarity leads to increased learning, right? And the reason is in an online environments are less forgiving. So you can't make changes and redirect in the moment, right? Especially with asynchronous. So if you send your students off to do an asynchronous activity and they can't find it, they can't find the instructions, they don't know exactly what they're doing, they're gonna disengage, right? So that is one big question when it comes to consistency in online learning is you have to ask yourself, is it disengagement? If a student's not doing something, are they disengaged, or is it disorganization, that your course isn't clear, right? It's not organized, it's not consistent, and they can't figure out what they're supposed to do, and a teacher isn't present to help them figure that out. So another big thing with online learning is you have to remember that you can't stand over your students' shoulders and guide them where to go somewhere. So that's why that consistency and organization is so important. You can't ensure students are accomplishing a task. So what can you do that are just little strategies to kind of help with consistency? We're going to talk about workspace card colors, workspace card images, and student dashboard. So this is all going to focus on the asynchronous side because the clarity and consistency that's really where it's super important, is with asynchronous. It's important to be consistent with synchronous, but you can more easily fix issues in a synchronous environment, right? You can redirect students a little more easy than in an asynchronous. So one idea is to use workspace card colors to provide consistency. This is another example from our Hāpara champion, Chris Miller. He used card colors to identify different types of tasks within the workspace. So blue cards are must-dos. They have to do anything that's blue within the workspace. Red cards are can-dos, kind of optional tasks, enrichment type things. And then yellow are challenge tasks. So it's really clear to the learner when they see a blue card, they know that's something they have to get done, right? When they see a yellow card, they know it's some type of challenge that they can opt into doing. Workspace card images are also a really good way to provide consistency. So in that same workspace from our champion, Chris Miller, he used the workspace card images to help students identify what was in the card. So it's really clear that whenever they see writing in the image, it's going to be a writing focused task. Whenever they see reading, it's a reading focused task. Whenever they see spelling, it's a spelling focused task, right? So using those card images to provide that consistency that way. Let me show you a few other examples of how to use workspace card images to provide consistency. This is actually our Hāpara Champion Educator workspace. We use the same card images throughout all 3 of our champion courses. So Educator, Scholar, and Trainer have the same look of the card images. So they're not only consistent throughout individual courses, but they're consistent amongst the 3 courses as people move through them. So we kind of operate on what they're going to do in the card. So in this example, it's more of like, what are you going to find in the card, right? Reading, writing, spelling. In this example, it's more of what are they going to do? They're going to watch a video. They're going to review a resource. They're going to learn more, kind of like enrichment type tasks. The do cards are their assignments or their assessments, right? So that's kind of how we do it in the champion course, how we use the workspace card images to provide consistency, direction, and visual cues. This is a workspace from our champion, Rebecca Recco. She is an art teacher, so she really brings the art perspective into her workspace card images. So this one in particular was all around Day of the Dead. So that's kind of the theme of the workspace card images. She also does it similar to what we do in the champion course, where the images are very action focused, right? So they start here, they reflect here. Also notice across the top, she uses the workspace card images to tell what that column is about. So column 1 are read cards, column 2 are watch cards, 3 are your do's, right, your assignments, and then column 4 has to do with sharing out with others. This is another workspace from a champion, Brittany Dunbar. She's actually in our trainer course right now that just started last week. I like how she used the workspace cards to provide steps. So it's really clear. Step 1, you start here. Step 2, you go here, right? And that's something that you can continue consistently amongst different workspaces within your course. All right. Last tip I have, I think, is about student dashboard. So student dashboard has a to-do view for students, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with student dashboard, this is the student-facing side of Hāpara. So if students go to mystudentdashboard.com, it takes them to their student dashboard. What it does is it takes and it aggregates information from Google Classroom, if you use it, Hāpara Workspace, Google Drive, and Gmail, all into one easy to organize board, basically. And there's different pieces to this board, but in particular, the to-do part of the board provides consistency because it always organizes tasks by due date. So you can see here, anything that's overdue is always at the top. Anything that has upcoming due dates kind of goes down from there. So a student knows that whenever they go to student dashboard, they're always going to basically have an automatically created to-do list for them, right? And again, this brings in information for both Google Classroom and Workspace. So this example is a Workspace assignment. This example is from Google Classroom. You can see the little classroom icon and it says right here, Google Classroom assignment. What this is, where it says Ancient Greece, that's the title of the workspace that the assignment is coming to, and coming from, excuse me. When the student clicks on any of these, it takes them exactly to that assignment in either Classroom or Workspace. So again, that consistency, that clarity, that organization. So Student Dashboard really provides that organization that is so critical to online learning. All right, so opening it back up to you. What little strategies can you do, or maybe you already do, to focus on consistency in your online courses? See if anybody has ideas. Give it a pause. Let's see, use consistent logos with activities. I use Seesaw, I put that logo in the card. Yeah, that's a really good idea. So say you use Seesaw or Flipgrid or Padlet, right? You can put some type of icon, whether it's an icon that you have brought in or the icon of the product in the card image, so they know whenever they see the Flipgrid icon in a card, in a workspace card image, that's going to be a Flipgrid task, right? Yeah, I love that idea. A little tip, I use icons a lot to provide consistency throughout digital learning tasks in particular. There's lots of different icon creators that you can go to. So Flat Icon and the Noun Project are two that are really good. Let me just open them up here. Nounproject.com. So the Noun Project actually integrates with Google Slides, which is really handy. I use that a lot because it has an add-on. So you can just open up the add-on in Google Slides and you can add those icons right into the slides. I also really like Flat Icon. It has lots and lots and lots of different options and colors and all sorts of good stuff. Let's see. Okay. Oh, I got one more. I use a lot of specific headers for the cards that are quite modified. Yeah, so having like really, are you talking about card? I'm assuming you're talking about card image headers in the workspace. Yeah, making sure that those are really consistent for sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up. So just kind of recap here. I focused on 4 big ideas. They're kind of like, you can think of these as like principles of online and blended learning or key takeaways, big ideas, whatever you want to call them. These are kind of like the essence of online learning and the online component of blended learning. You have to focus on social emotional. We talked about the research behind that, why it's critical to online learning that you build relationships with your students and make them feel a sense of community. You really need to embed brain breaks. We also talked about research there behind how synchronous online learning especially is fatiguing and how staring at a screen without visual breaks can make us fatigued. Choice is really key. And we talked about why in terms of that shift of control, especially with time and space, shifts to the student with online. So you have to shift some other parts of the learning process to the student. So the student is really taking charge of their learning. And we looked at how to create choice boards and learning menus using Workspace. And then we talked about consistency and specifically how to use Workspace card colors, Workspace card images, and student dashboard to really provide consistency, organization, and clarity to your digital materials, to your online courses. So hopefully you were able to get some ideas about how the different Hāpara tools can help you simplify online and blended learning. I wanted to open it up kind of for some Q&A here at the end. What tips do you have for simplifying online and blended learning, or any other questions that you have? Feel free to add them into the Q&A. I'll pause and see if there's any questions. I think I've answered all that have come through so far. More shares than questions, I should say. Let's see, question. How do you provide choice at the same time that you keep things simple? Good question. So what I try to do is, if the good place to start, well, let me back up. Let me give you a bigger picture. So John Spencer, let me find it here. John Spencer has a really good, let me see if I can find it. Student, I think he calls it student agency. Let me see if I can find his graphic. He has this really good graphic, there it is, right there, that breaks down choice boards into 4 categories. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There we go. Okay, so from teacher-centered on the left to student-centered on the right, so 4 categories. So there's 4 different levels of basically like choice boards that you can create. Level 1, I tell people just skip over and go straight to level 2 because the level 2 simple choice menu is really simple to make. That's what I showed you an example of with the taxes example. So a simple choice menu, students have the same learning goal, but they get a choice in the learning task or the assessment, right? And how they show it. Level 3, an advanced choice menu, gives students choice in the learning goal as well as the learning task. So to keep it simple, start with level 2 simple choice menus and see how they go, right? So students are still focused on the same learning goal, but you're giving them choice in the product, in the task of how they do it. Also, don't feel like you have to give tons of different choices, even just give 3. I like to focus on a low tech, a no tech, and a high tech option. That's a nice little equity hack when it comes to online learning. By the way, when it comes to equity and online learning, you need to give lots of choices, lots of options, and be super flexible. So that's a good way to do it. Give a no tech, a low tech, and a high tech option, right? So they get 3 options of how to show what they're going to learn. That's a really good way to keep it simple. Don't feel like you have to give a lot of different options. You can start there when you get comfortable. Maybe then you add in some different options for learning resources, right? By the way, in online learning, you should always provide, I always try to provide at least a written resource and a visual resource. So they get some type of like article, and then they also usually get some type of video or maybe even a podcast that's more auditory than visual. But one in each of those categories, so they get different modalities to kind of get the content in. So you're gonna be doing that anyway with online learning, so it's easy just to provide that as part of the choice. Hopefully that answered that question. Let me know if there's, if you want me to elaborate on that. Another question is providing choices an option offered by Hāpara, or do we do it ourselves? Meaning, are there choice boards in Hāpara? Great question. So let me actually go to let me go open up Workspace because I want to show you something here. Let's go to Workspace. Okay, when you go to Hāpara Workspace, so I showed you how to create choice menus within Workspace, right? Once you're there, up here at the top, you have 2 options. You have your workspaces, so those are workspaces that you've created that have been shared with you, etc. But if you click on Discover, this is hundreds and hundreds of workspaces that have been created by other educators that you can copy and make your own. So for example, this one I'm pretty sure was created by one of our champions, I Heart Lungs, I remember it. If you click on that, it shows you the workspace, right? And then up here in the top right corner, let me zoom in there a little bit, you can click on copy. Okay, so you click on copy, it makes a copy of this workspace. It saves that in your My Workspaces view, and then you can edit it however you want. Okay, so tons and tons of workspaces in here you can copy. You can add to, if you want to add more choice, you could always go in and add more cards, right, to give different choice options. So in this example, they make a social media profile. Maybe you add another card where they make an option is to make a video instead of a social media profile. Great question. What kinds of no tech and low tech options do you provide? So in terms of no tech, I always try to provide an option that they can do on paper. So let me hop back to my slides here. If we're looking at that taxes example, let me find it somewhere around here. Okay, so foldable, that is a no tech option. A foldable is no tech, right? So they take paper and they fold it and they make different categories and then they answer the question under each category, right? Total no tech option. You can't see it in the screenshot here, but another option in this example is they can do an interview with a tax expert. They can make that an actual interview, or it can be a fictional interview that they kind of write the script for. That can be low tech, so they can open up a Google Doc and just write the script, right? Or it could be completely no tech. They could write it out and then take a picture and upload it, right, to the workspace card if they wanted to. So that's a couple examples of like a no tech, a low tech. So a lot of the times, even the choices that I have embedded have no tech, low tech, high tech options within them, if that makes sense. Hopefully that gives you kind of some ideas to think about. Any other questions? So my no tech option is almost always like a paper, some type of paper option. And again, lots of flexibility, so I'm not requiring anything specific that they have. But you know, to do a foldable, they could even, all they need is just literally a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. That's it. They can get fancy if they want. They could, if they had different colored papers, they could add that to the foldable, but they don't have to. So again, just focusing on equity and giving lots of options. Any other questions? Shoot away. Make my little screen bigger so I can see them. All right. Oh, I just had one come in. Great question. Is the Hāpara Champion program free? It is. It is completely free to anybody that is a Hāpara user. So if you're at a school that uses Hāpara, if you go to Hāpara.com, I can't type and talk at the same time, it's a problem. Get-certified. That's where you can find more information about the program. There are 3 different levels. So you have to go in order of the levels, but you don't have to go and do every level. So you have to start an educator. If you want to move on, you can move to scholar. And then if you want to move on, you can move to trainer. I see Tristan is on this webinar. He is actually in our trainer course right now. So he has already worked through educator and scholar and is on to trainer. So once you get to that Hāpara.com/get-certified. If you scroll down, you see the information about each of the courses. You can click on sign up and you basically just fill in your name, your email, and it signs you up for the course. How much time does it take? Great question. It's complete. The courses are completely asynchronous. So educator, you get 4 weeks to complete the course at your own pace within that 4 weeks. Scholar and trainer, you get 9 weeks because they're a little bit more time intensive. So the more you work through the different levels, the little more time intensive that they get. For educator, a very estimated amount of time, we say 15 hours. Some people take a lot less, some people take more. It really just depends on how much your effort and time that you want to spend in it. The educator course is very much focused on learning our different tools. So you get a unit for each tool. So you start with highlights and then you do teacher dashboard, then workspace, then student dashboard. So you really get an intensive view learning about each of the different pieces of the instructional suite. Great questions. Any other questions? We got 2 minutes left. Okay, I don't see anything. Well, thank you for coming. Thanks for your time. Hopefully you were able to pick up just 1 or 2 little tips or strategies that you can apply to your blended and online courses and environments. Hopefully we see you in another webinar. If you attended, whether you attended live or you're watching the recording, you're going to get an email that has the link to that recording as well as a link to the slides that I used as well. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.